Northern Lights, a look at Minnesota books and writers, is presented by the Minnesota Center for the Book, a program of the Minnesota Humanities Commission, with funding provided by Target Stores and the Elmer L. and Eleanor J. Anderson Foundation.
Welcome to Northern Lights. I'm Alison McGhee, a Minneapolis writer, and today I'm interviewing Emily Carter, who is another Minneapolis writer and the author of Glory Goes and Gets Some. Glory Goes and Gets Some is a collection of interlinked short stories, most of which focus on Glory, the central character, who is a woman in her 30s. She's originally from New York City, and she is fresh out of rehab in the Twin Cities. She's looking for love, and she is looking to form a new life. It's a wonderful book. It's gotten great reviews. It was a finalist for the 2001 Minnesota Book Award, and it came out in September of 2000 from Coffee House Press. Welcome.
Thanks.
Emily, I would like to talk today about your book, which I loved. And what I'd like to say about it first is that some of the stories are long. They're more of a traditional length of short stories, and some are very short. And I'm wondering how you managed to pull off the same incredible lyricism throughout. Did you begin as a poet by chance?
Unfortunately, yes.
Unfortunately.
Well, or fortunately. I actually began as a spoken word performer, and I got a lot of my training going to spoken word poetry readings. They weren't
slams, or
they
can you
weren't
describe
called
more?
slams then. They weren't really even called spoken word then. They were called poetry readings.
Poetry
And everybody got 3 minutes on the mic, on the open mic, no more, no less. And if you went over that, an alarm bell would sound, you know, or an egg timer. And it was a terrific way for someone like me to learn to write, because I was very performance-oriented. I was very hammy. And at the time, I didn't have the patience and the formal training to work on a longer piece, but what I could do was I could polish my craft, and I could make the piece that I knew I was going to read next Saturday night as good and as tight and as compelling as I possibly could. So it was a great training for a young writer like myself who didn't have a college education, but only had a love of words.
So you began with the love of language, and would you say that your experience in spoken word honed your sense of timing, both written and oral?
Absolutely, it did, it did. And it was, as I said, it was a reflection of myself as a younger artist. And in the book, you can actually see that the pieces go from shorter to longer in a lot of ways. They open up with a page and a half of what might be called a prose poem. By the end, I'm starting to write longer pieces with a narrative arc and some different kinds of character development. And the reason is that not only did that book take me 12 years to write, but I changed during that time. So what you get when you read the book is not only the development of the character, you get to see my development as from a very young writer to the writer I am now. And,
Interesting.
And if you're a reader, you'll hopefully read it with a more forgiving eye than I will, because it's like having to confront my 22-year-old self in some senses.
Well, when I read it, I didn't have to take any forgiveness to it at all. I thought it was a wonderful book. One of the things I most loved about it is your lyrical sense of language. You love words, and it comes through in every piece. So much so that I found myself reading a lot of them aloud, and that would feed into your experience as a spoken word performer.
Absolutely.
Did many of the shorts, would you still call them prose poems?
I never labeled them. I suppose they could be called prose poems. They were written to be performed. They're almost monologues or performance pieces. But I never thought about what they were supposed to be called, you know, in terms of genre when I wrote them. I just wrote them.
You just wrote them. And where did...
And on a good day, I rewrote them.
On a good day, you rewrote. Well, the book took you 12 years to write?
Yeah, well, because I wasn't working on a book. It's a reflection of 12 years of work. Now, toward the end of that time, I started seeing a narrative arc emerge, and I started, you know, writing with a theme and an arc toward an ending in mind.
Was Glory, excuse me, was Glory, who's the main character in many of the stories, was she a central character right from the beginning of your writing, or did she emerge more fully formed in the development?
Both. Glory is like my megaphone. I mean, she's, you know, people always ask, is she your alter ego? Is she you? Well, no, she's much bolder than I am, and much more willing to say whatever comes into her head, and in a lot of ways, you know, more mythical and crazy than I am. She's what I would be if I had no fear of uttering anything aloud, you know.
And yet Glory does change in the book, too.
Yes, she does.
One of the things I most appreciate about it is that she is not a static character. We can see her from the very beginning of her new life and her tentative attempts to form relationships till the end when I have a sense that she is out there and she's going to live a full life. One of the things I most loved about her was her tenderness and her compassion toward those, you know, there's unfortunate people in the world, and she resonates with them. She speaks for them in a way. And I wonder if you could talk about where she emerged from, in addition to being your alter ego and your megaphone. Where did she come from?
Glory is the manifestation of my own feelings of marginalization and my own feelings of outsiderness and my own feelings of discomfort with that. But at the same time, I do think that she has empathy, and I do think that she has a humanity, and that's because her experience is broader, you know, than in a lot of ways, even, you know, than mine. She's able to move through different worlds and different places and to connect with people on a human level, hopefully.
Yes. Rather than, I mean, Glory is a woman who has suffered a great deal in her life, from addiction, from bad choices, from family dysfunction, and yet rather than emerge from that with rigidity and walls put up, you know, to protect herself, she's opening herself to the world, and that's a very beautiful part of the book, I think.
Thank you.
Emily, can you tell me about some of your artistic influences other than writing and books?
Okay. Well, I'm glad you asked me that, because, you know, I can certainly talk, I mean, every writer can talk about influences of other writers. What inspired me passionately and made me want to create was so diverse. It could, you know, there was theater, there was, you know, wonderful plays that moved me, like, you know, Harold Pinter plays, and there was Patti Smith, who was the ultimate spoken word artist, and there was music, which made me want to dance and made me want to, in words, create the same feeling that I was getting from the music. And then there was always radio. That was my constant companion, yes. Late night. And some of my stories deal with radio.
Luminous Dial is focused on, or begins with the radio, doesn't it?
That's
right. In fact, it's focused on one.
In fact, it's all about the radio, as is W Love. There's a radio theme there, too. But yeah, Luminous Dial was my response to the idea of late night radio and having a voice come at you intimately in the dark
yeah.
like that.
Would you like to read that for our audience?
I'd love to.
Great.
It's one of the few pieces I've memorized.
Oh, excellent.
At the hour in the middle of the night, when there is nothing to move, your digital clock radio will come on all at once, for no other reason than that it's as you've always suspected. Inanimate objects aren't inanimate, but are instead possessed of soul and will, and mean you no good. At first, it will sound far away, tinny soft and static, like the orange and yellow merengue floating out from behind corrugated bodega awnings, or like the memory of listening to music in a Jersey seaside town with its striped revival tents, stone canals, and long gone from high school students manning the arcades by the Atlantic with their shag haircuts and pebble gray eyes. Then the sound will become audibly swollen. And even though you try to switch the dial, switch it off, yank the plug, let the gadget sail, clacking and clattering into the wall, its chatter won't stop, but instead only grows more persistent until you can discern different elements, different voices, all saying things you don't want to hear. And this, my darling, is radio death. This is Radio Fear, coming to you straight and true and live over the airtight, airless waves of longing, and we are playing all the hits tonight. The voice of that person you loved and left, singing in small, chanting words, a child's song, you remember that one. Or the conspicuous absence of laughter after that last misplaced joke you tried to tell at your uncle's funeral, your uncle whom nobody liked but didn't really want to hear jokes about at that particular moment. We are replaying that 2 seconds of silence in the mix forever and ever. Or the sound of the counselor at the resort your parents took you to announcing your win in the swimming race, the win you had cheated for by pushing off with your feet, more running than swimming, your fake panting, the sound of your desire to win, or your fake panting sounds when you were doing the ding-dong with that boy you met or that girl you met at that bar or that AA meeting who you didn't really know well enough to talk to about your genitals, so you just pretended to be swept up in the moment. That cry of faux pleasure will echo like a dial tone all night on this all-night station. Don't turn over, darling. I'm right here. I'm right here like an eternal mosquito coming to you on a frequency of megawatts too large for you to even conceive of, and I'm never leaving you again. This is all-night good time radio, and you'll never have to be alone in the dark the way that I was. But it turned out it wasn't such a good idea to leave me alone with no lights on, because now we're going to replay over and over again my fear of the dark. Except it will be yours now. And there's no getting out of it ever. No getting up to turn on the light. There will be no light ever again, except from the green dashboard glow of the digital clock, which will never change to the next minute. And no sound either, except for the sound of my voice announcing over and over again the litany of times that you failed, or might fail, or might have failed without knowing it. Oh, relax, my own sweet country, 'tis of thee till dawn's early light. This is me on the radio, and I'm coming to you, coming to you, coming to you, live.
Emily, thank you so much. I can tell that you are a spoken word performer. Your style is wonderful.
Or just a ham.
Or just
Big
a
ol' ham
That
bone.
works too. Why not?
Yeah.
At this point, let's broaden our discussion a little bit. And I'll ask you the million-dollar question that many writers get asked. Do you think that books, the kind of books that you write, and people like me write too, are destined to the relic heap in light of our multimedia world, our shortening attention spans, and our audio-visual focus?
I think we absolutely are, if we do not adapt. And by adapt, I don't mean shortening our pieces or playing to any lowest common denominator, but we need to allow ourselves to think outside the parameters. And it goes back to what I'm saying before, which was we need to let the emotional and creative feelings that we get from other forms of media influence us. And that can be communicated. And now we really are playing for higher stakes. We always need to get to the heart of the matter. There's no time for lukewarm epiphanies. There's no time for tepid motif weaving. We need to hit home and hit hard. So we need to do that as writers by, of course, building up our array of tools and polishing our craft, but we need to be fearless. We need to get to the emotional center of things.
Oh, that's a wonderful term. How is this belief affecting your own work?
What it does for me is that I want the same sense of immediacy that I get from watching a good movie or hearing good music. And I'm talking good now, not, not schlock.
Right. Not elevator music.
No. But, and I don't mean that I would write sensationalistically or that I would shorten my words to, for shorter attention spans. What I mean is that I aim for a reaction and
an emotional
reaction, the same as you get from seeing a movie or a play or reading a wonderful book, But I think that I'm a little more willing to take risks and a little more willing to make myself uncomfortable to do that than I might otherwise have been, because I'm playing against some very big boys in terms of getting a reader's heart and mind.
Would you say you're more willing to put yourself on the line in your writing?
Yes, I'm more willing to deal with subjects that make me uncomfortable. I'm more willing to experiment. I'm willing to write in genres, or try to write in genres, or take from genres that might be considered pop. I'm willing to dabble in science fiction. I'm willing to dabble in horror. I'm willing to dabble in fantasy, or whatever it takes, whatever gives me an emotional frisson, whatever makes my hair stand up. And it could be Tina Turner's voice on an old Ike and Tina record when she sang like a demon from hell because he was still beating her.
Right.
Anything, I go for that.
Okay.
Because audiovisual and those other mediums are so instant and hard connecting when they're good.
So you go straight for the emotional core?
I hope to. Okay. And by straight to it, that doesn't mean that I beat my breast and rant and rave, but I try to pick the most direct and accurate route there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think that is evidenced throughout your book.
Thank you.
Let me talk about something very tangible now. Can you tell me about your process of writing itself, the physical process? When do you write? Do you use a pencil and paper, a computer?
Good question. I write when I have the time.
And what does that mean to you? Does that mean 15 minutes in the middle of the day, or does that mean 8-hour blocks?
That has to be an 8-hour block. And I write in a notebook first and then to computer. The reason I do that is because then I can tell myself I'm not revising, I'm just typing, because I hate revising.
But as you type, you change little bits
Absolutely,
here and there.
absolutely. It's your first rewrite.
Okay.
It's your first rewrite. And I start out slow. I start out writing for maybe 10 minutes. And then I build up. If I'm working on a longer project, I build up, until eventually I am working 8 hours a day.
I see.
But I have long fallow periods in between when I get as out of shape as somebody who hasn't done their sit-ups and their stamina's not good, and then they go to the aerobics class and they're absolutely out of breath. So it's, when I start again, it's a slow start.
Are the ideas percolating way down deep during the fallow times?
Yes, I hope so.
We hope so.
Yes.
We love that.
Yes.
In your book, Glory is originally from New York. She ends up in Minneapolis. Now, I know that you are originally from New York,
That's
and
right.
here we are in the Aster Cafe
Right.
on the banks of the Mississippi, and I'm wondering how your personal migration from New York to Minneapolis influenced your work, if it did.
It was a very important part of my work. New York is a wonderful city. It may be the greatest city in the world. There's no place like it, but if you don't get out of it, you become provincial. And you begin to think that it's the only reality there is. And so in that way, you're just the same as a very suspicious, xenophobic peasant who lives an hour away from her next town. It's not good for one's art.
What an
to think
interesting
that way.
comment.
And it brought me in touch with 99.9% of the rest of the continental United States who don't live or think or act or speak as New Yorkers do. So it broadened my experiences, my horizons, and this is the very definition of a place with a broad horizon as big as the sky is here. And it was crucial to my development as an artist.
Interesting.
Absolutely.
Where do you see yourself going now with your work? You've mentioned the influences of the audio-visual culture and perhaps forms of pop media. I'm wondering if you have a long-term vision for a new book, or if you are focused as a short story writer.
I'm trying to write a novel right now for two reasons. One is that it's easier to sell one than a collection of short stories. I'm constantly being told that it's hard to sell a collection of short stories. But the other is that I have more to say now, and I have more confidence now.
Okay. Emily, I'm wondering if, given the fact that we're here in Minneapolis and it's been such an influence on your work, if you'd like to read an excerpt from your story titled Minneapolis.
I'd absolutely love to.
Thanks.
My darling, it's haunted here. In downtown Minneapolis, the souls of the good dead become electric streetlights, or the tiny white jewels threaded in loops to the black sky lining the iron bridge across the Mississippi River. But look out. Lead the wrong kind of life and you'll turn into one of the newly installed porta-johns in Boom Island Park. And the lights are not confined to downtown. Minneapolis proper is 20 miles long and 15 miles wide, so at night when the windows and lights are blinking, it seems to go on forever. The prospect of endless suburbs and bedroom communities sprawling out into the droning nighttime distance becomes both more and less overwhelming when you know that each light you see used to have a name. The noise in downtown Minneapolis spins like pinwheel sparklers in your ears on Saturday night. Televisions blaring out of sports cars, street hassles, rich kid revelers lurching from club to club, radio station songs of dance and romance, bright and twinkling like aluminum foil, the endless thudding of trucks over the Hennepin Avenue Bridge. But listen closely for only a second, and you will hear the calm, electric buzz of the happy dead who just couldn't bear to leave the city. Death, unlike life, sending down nothing that a soul can't bear. In the suburbs, it's quieter, but just as active. 3 miles out of town, the malls of menace and the industrial parks rule in air-conditioned silence over acres of implacable green lawns landscaped like golf courses. These areas used to be farms and rolling prairie and dotted woods, and when a man or woman died there, she shone in the stars overhead, relieved at last from the iron drudgery of farm work, but unable to let go of what had extracted over the years all her willing or unwilling love. So, in the constellations over the Ridgedale Mall, the stars hang in frozen white-blue tears.
When you are beginning to work on a piece, say you're coming out of one of your fallow periods, or an idea has come to you, or actually I don't know if an idea comes to you, that's my question. Do you think before you begin about the impact you want to create in the reader, or are you drawn into the writing of a story by a character who comes to you? What is the genesis of the story?
Usually it's an image or a phrase, or as mushy and vague as this sounds, an indefinable, intangible feeling, usually of melancholy. And then there's a day and a half that I spend with my inner committee, during which they present me with reasons why my idea is not valid, interesting, original, or worth anything at all. Why what I am thinking of doing shouldn't be done because it's been done a million times before, better than I can ever do it, and various other unflattering things about myself. And
Gosh, these thoughts have never occurred to me.
Yeah, I know. This is very odd for a writer, yeah. So once I've let them sort of have their say and run out of steam, then I can get down to work with my idea or my feeling or my image or my phrase.
Okay. It sounds as though from the very start you have been deeply influenced by other artistic forms.
Mm-hmm.
And I am wondering why it is that writing or the spoken word became the form that is yours. Why not painting or dancing, acting?
Good. That's a very good question. Why with anybody? Well, first of all, I mean, I chose not to necessarily talk about the writers that influenced me today because I just wanted to add something fresh. I mean, writers have had a huge influence on me. And some passages from certain books that I, will never ever forget reading for the first time. The reason that I didn't become a guitar player or a ballet dancer or any of that was I had a facility for writing. And when I was a smaller child, I did not have the discipline to practice to learn a new skill. So I had this facility that got me lots of positive attention. And I wish I could say something more noble, but that's about it.
So you found that even as a child, you had the ability to spin the words out, and it didn't take a whole lot of locking yourself in a soundproof room with a piano or a guitar?
No, and
okay.
I didn't have to do it for an hour every day, and all of the things that kids have trouble with, particularly me.
You were a natural storyteller.
I was a natural spiel spinner, I would say.
A spiel spinner.
Yes, it's 3 times fast. When I was going to be interviewed for first grade at a school my mother dearly wanted me to get into because it was where she'd gone to school, I felt so much pressure to be special and excel to get into this school that I told them that my mother and I were both movie stars, and my mother was a very famous movie star and was making a movie of Heidi in which I was going to star as Heidi and she was going to star as the ailing mother. And naturally I didn't get into the school.
But it was the birth of the writer.
Right. Well, and I learned how words could function both to your gain and to your detriment.
And to your detriment.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you'd like to say to our audience about fiction?
Please read it.
Please read it. Please read it.
It'll reward your time and give you back what you give it.
It'll give you back what you give it. And that's what your book did for me, for sure.
You.
And thank you, Emily, for appearing on Northern Lights with us today.
You're welcome.
Northern Lights, a look at Minnesota books and writers, is presented by the Minnesota Center for the Book, a program of the Minnesota Humanities Commission, with funding provided by Target Stores and the Elmer L. and Eleanor J. Anderson Foundation.